to welcome you all to Starr King School for the Ministry. I'm Meg Richardson, and I teach UU history, and I'm the interim dean of the faculty. I am delighted to have this special event tonight to share with you all, and I have an introduction for our first speaker, Charles Garfield. Charles Garfield is a psychologist, professor, lecturer, and the author of 12 books, including Life's Last Gift, Giving and Receiving Peace When a Loved One is Dying. He has been recognized internationally as the founder and inspiration for Shanti Project, a widely acclaimed AIDS and cancer organization. A clinical professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California School of Medicine in San Francisco for nearly 4 decades, and a fellow of the American Psychological Association, he is currently one of our research scholars at the Starr King School for the Ministry at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Dr. Garfield's many honorary speeches include the Clinton White House Conference, U.S. Olympic Committee and head coaches of Olympic sports, and the leadership of Oklahoma City following the bombing of that city's federal building. His primary message for you tonight will be, love heals. Thank you.
Well, welcome. It's a pleasure to see all these familiar faces. It's really a trip. It's actually easy because I know you like me on it. You know, one of the things I have to start with is writing a book is an interesting experience. Those of you who've known somebody or have done it yourself know that it takes an enormous amount of effort. And then when the book is published and it's out in the world, you're 50% done. You've got to then go out and tell everybody about it in a sort of ways. I must confess, though, that the heartwarming response to Life's Last Gift has been extraordinary to me. Some of the feedback I've been getting nationally has been as positive as I could have imagined. And when I say positive, I don't just mean that the book is doing well in the marketplace. That's not why I wrote this book, as you might guess. I wrote it because I wanted to be able, the image I had in mind is I wanted to be able to hand it to individuals who needed it, who needed it now, who anticipated needing it at some time in the future. Now, the interesting thing about the book is that it actually has a hidden message, which I didn't realize till the book was all done. And people started telling me, hey, this book is not just for people at the end of life. It's not just about relationships during someone's dying time. But in fact, these principles, these commitments that the book is based on, fits and is useful for people in all relationships. So I realized, you know, it wasn't in my mind when I wrote it, but it's true. Let me give you a bit about the journey that led to the book. I founded a project that some of you know called Shanti Project, which has gotten an enormous amount of justifiable attention for all the good people who have come through our doors in the last nearly 44 years. You tried running a nonprofit for 44 years without having an endowment, having to get money every single year and not knowing if you'll make it to the next year. And then it's 44 years later. And our gala is held in the Palace in San Francisco, and our other gala is held at the Fairmont. At the beginning, we were doing chips and dip in the church basement. And now, because of the support, people recognize what we were doing. Now, during those 44 years at Shanti and at the Cancer Research Institute at UCSF, where I was on the faculty for years, I took care at UC of hundreds of people during their dying time. And at Shanti, over the last 4+ decades, I've helped train, along with other wonderful people, thousands, literally, or over 20,000 volunteers in the Bay Area alone. And there are many, many projects elsewhere modeled after Shanti. So the book is based on what I learned in these situations. It's a legacy project. I hope for all of you that you have some legacy project. It might be your children or grandchildren. It might be a book you wrote. It might be an art project. It might be something you do in the world. I hope for all of you that you have the exquisite pleasure of having something that justifies your life here on this planet. Now you might say, well, I don't need anything to justify it. Oh, okay, good. But for the rest of us, something that's a legacy project, I think, is, for me, an exquisite pleasure. It's also, of course, a tribute to the people I work with at Shanti with the Cancer Institute. The book is also based on the 2.7 million people who die in this country every year. 90% of the family members of those people, 90% think it's a family's responsibility to care for those dying loved ones. And yet we have so few user-friendly resources. There are plenty of books on death and dying, but trust me, you can do the research yourself if you wish. Very few books on what to say, what to do, and most importantly, how to be. How to be during the dying time. So I wrote this book for parents and grandparents and other family members and friends. I wrote it for partners and spouses. I wrote it for hospice people and other health professionals, doctors, nurses, getting wonderful responses from the professional community as well. We have more user-friendly resources for how to fix your car and play golf than we do how to take care of the person you love most in the world during their dying time. I know you don't want to think of that. Of course you don't want that image. What if the person I love most in the world were dying? Would I know how to be? Would I know? The book is based on 9 commitments, and those 9 commitments actually rest on 2 principles. One you heard in the introduction. Love heals. Doesn't always cure. It doesn't always cure, but love can heal us spiritually and emotionally and psychologically and interpersonally, even if it doesn't heal us physically. And it's also based on the principle that caregiving at its best is love made visible. Love made visible. There's some lovely topics, I think, in the book. It's based, as I said, on 9 commitments, one of which is to listen to people's stories. Their stories are their legacy. When people are telling you stories, even if you've heard it 12 times before, this is different. This is different. During the dying time, the meaning of the story is different. If they choose to tell you during that occasion about something in their history, they're telling you about what they're proud of. They're telling you about their legacy. And people tend to talk about 2 things during the dying time. People they loved and who loved them. And they'll tell you all those things. And then work that they're proud of. Work that made a difference. Work that served something greater than themselves. Love and work. Nobody ever said during the dying time that their most important memory was their Maserati. Nobody mentioned a possession of any kind. It was love and work. It's their life review. It gives you a chance to walk in the world for your loved one after they're gone. You listen to their stories. You learn the lessons of those stories. You learn the values. And then you incorporate those as you choose into your own being and walk in the world for the person who's gone. Small things. There's a chapter on small things meaning a lot. When my mother was dying, and I was a primary caregiver for my mother, my father, and my best friend. And I was there a lot for all 3 of them. When my mother was dying, one day, she asked me to get her boxes of her favorite treat, Skinny Cow ice cream box. But I used to bring 1 box for her. This time she wanted me to bring many boxes, and she was mysterious about what she had in mind. So I did, and she said, "Can you hand out the boxes nurses and other people around here, and especially Felicia was in a skilled nursing facility. You know, can you hand out the ice cream treats to the people here? They could use a little cheering up. She was dying herself at the time. And this was not like her. She went through quite the transformation during the dying time, which is another thing to get used to. Changes in the individual. The old phrase that people die the way they live is only partially true. The other half of the story is major changes can occur. People are more likely to change during their dying time than perhaps any other time in the life cycle. The first three commitments are easy to say. You know, Albert Einstein had it right. You can't say it simply. You don't understand it well enough. Listen from the heart. Speak from the heart. Act from the heart. Listen, speak, act. And if you had to choose one, if you only have the willingness to do one thing when you show up, listen from the heart. You don't have to have the answers to the questions. It's actually much better if you know how to ask questions than attempt to answer them. But most important of all is listening from the heart. 70 to 90% of the information that we send to one another, we send non-verbally. So while you're listening, listen fully from the heart. Compassionate presence, attentiveness. What are you doing when you work with people during their end stage? You're making memories. You're making memories. You're lessening regrets. And you're expressing gratitude. Memories, regrets, gratitude. All in all, the experience of being cared for benefits the person going through the experience of dying. The experience of being cared for is more important than anything you say or do. Show up, please. I mean, fully show up. I don't mean just walk in the door. I mean, when you're there, you're fully present. Pay attention. I mean, fully, mindfully pay attention. And care deeply. Let me finish with a story. When my father was dying, he was diagnosed in 1990 with a very deadly form of liver cancer. And the prognosis was 3 months. He beat it by a little, but not much. And I was writing a series of books that a few people probably remember on high achievers, books called Peak Performers and Peak Performance. I was always fascinated with high achievers. I was in the heroic period of my life. I was in my 40s, and I was ready to, I just had a heroic mindset. I was going to find a cure for death. How's that? Terminal prognoses with an absolutely deadly illness I was going to find. And I searched everywhere. I searched, and I was a fixture at the UCSF Med Library. At the time, you had to go in the stacks. And I read, and I didn't find anything that seemed reasonable to me. And then I heard something that I thought was amazing. I heard about exceptional patients. People who had terminal prognoses but survived. They made it. They got through, they survived, they lived. And then there was a doc who got them together, Bernie Siegel, who some of you may remember, wrote a book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And he videotaped in those days. And I got the videotapes, and I was going to show them to Dad. And we lay down in parallel recliner chairs, and I popped in the videotape, and there they were speaking about how they made it. And I thought, this is what we need. And Dad's going to pay attention, I'm going to pay attention, we're going to do whatever they say. A few minutes into it, I'm riveted, and I hear this noise coming from me. He's out cold snoring. So I thought, maybe, okay, pain meds, he's sleepy, he's tired. Yes, right. So I woke him up. Okay, I'll listen. Same thing happened. And it happened a third time. I said, Dad, what's going on? This is important. This is fight for your lifetime. And he looked at me with this kind of beatific look. He said, that stuff that you got there, that fight for your life stuff, that's not me at all. That's not me at all. I believe what the doctors call me. And I don't want to waste my time running around searching for this. Man, I want to spend time with you. And with your brother, and with your mother. And then he looked away and he looked down. He made direct eye contact, which was a little unusual, I knew. And in a voice that I had never heard before, said to me, Charlie, I love you. Mm-hmm. Never in my life before or since has anybody said I love you. The utter authenticity of that man on that day. That story is in Life's Last Gift. Now, a portion of all the earnings from Life's Last Gift is going to go to Shanti Project. So if I'm fortunate enough to make a little, then Shanti will benefit so much the better. I hope all of you have a copy. I hope you have a copy for somebody in your life who needs it. At some point, you will need this, trust me. And to have the guidance is an enormous benefit. Okay, let me introduce Cindy. I've been looking for the I'll start out by saying that Cindy is my wife, so purpose of full disclosure. She is also an author, social activist, and, my favorite, an explorer of the unconventional. She authored a book called Wisdom Circles, A Guide to Self-Discovery and Community Building in Small Groups, and co-authored a book we did together called Sometimes My Heart Goes Numb, Love and Caregiving in a Time of AIDS. She also co-edited the anthology Earthlight, Spiritual Wisdom for an Ecological Age. She was also national producer of over 100 nonfiction audiobooks. Since the mid-1990s, she's been active in local ecology in the San Francisco area and co-founded 2 ecology nonprofits, Earth Team and Close to Home, as well as serving as the coordinator for Earth Day 2000 for the Bay Area. I remember when she did that. I've never seen anybody work for a nonprofit for no money, damn near all night, most nights, or deeply into the night. I'd be out dealing with prostate challenges in the middle of the night, and she'd be out for 3 in the morning doing stuff. She did a great job. Her explorations have been in the fields of spirituality, transpersonal psychology, and personal growth. We lived together in Northern California with our 2 cats, Bella and Layla, who started out not liking each other much, but we've gotten to the level of a daytime. So I'd like to introduce now my loved one, my soulmate, Cindy Starr.
Thank you for coming. This is such a treat for the 2 of us to do our books together and to have all of our close friends and people who have worked on our books here with us here. This is just overwhelming. And thank you to Starr King for letting us have this space. It's just been a treat to be able to put this all together. My book is called The Wave and the Drop. Wisdom stories about death and afterlife. And writing this book has been a journey for me too. Like Charlie talks about, it being a journey, writing a book is really a journey. What I had to do was find the courage to look at my own mortality and to also think about and consider, what are my beliefs? What do I believe about death and afterlife? I had to challenge myself. Is that something I'm supposed to pay attention to? I had to first challenge myself, because the book raises the questions: what happens when we die, and what happens after we die? And if I couldn't answer those questions for myself, how could I possibly write a book? So those two questions became the core theme of Wave and Drop. The book's also a sketch of the journey that humankind has taken for the last several thousand years. We as humans have tried to put together answers to those two questions: what happens when you die, what happens after you die. And we've written many, many stories. Some of them have lasted many decades and millennia. And so I tried to capture some of the stories from those wisdom traditions as well. So what I conceived of is the Wave and the Drop is kind of an Aesop's fables for the dying. Short stories, short chapters, where I try to get the essential message of the different traditions and put them together in one book without highlighting any particular one, but giving you a set of answers to those questions that you could think about for yourself. The genesis of all of this was Charlie's mom. She was in hospice at her dying time, and she and I were together alone one day in the fall of 2009. And she looked at me and she said, "Cindy, what do you think happens when you die?" And she had been raised secularly as a Jew, but not with any religious background. And I could have said, "I don't know," but she was counting on me. She wanted to know what I thought. And so I said, "Well, there are stories. Let me tell you a few stories." She knew my parents were Catholic. They had both passed away, believing that they were going to heaven. And the one that I told her that I knew about from the Hindu tradition was the wave and the drop. There's a big wave. It has individual drops. They exist independently for a while, and then they fall back into the ocean. She got it immediately. She knew it. That was it. That was the one she wanted. And so for the rest of her time, and Charlie can verify this, she mentioned the wave and the drop. Falling back into the ocean, or just a drop. That story served her extremely well. And that's why the title is The Wave and the Drop. It's the most universal of all the stories. I lost a close friend a short time later, and then a friend of 40 years, my friend Bud, died in 2014. And this idea of stories helping people was percolating. So finally I said to Charlie, I said, "What do you think the idea of me writing a book of short stories, just a really small book that puts together some of these stories?" And he said, "Go for it." And he's been part of the journey for me ever since. So the book has the story of heaven, it has the story of the incarnation, it has the story of the circle, which is a Native American version of the story. And each one I try to not only capture the classic idea of what that story was about, but use contemporary stories to illustrate it. And so I was a bit challenged with the story of heaven, because I had been raised Catholic, and I had some baggage left over from the Catholic Church that I hadn't properly, disposed of, and hadn't really gotten that the Church had moved on. And I was priest trained in 1967. And so I was challenged by that, and people who read that chapter said, the other chapters are great, this one doesn't quite get it. So I gathered together my Christian friends and got lots of help. Judith is here. She was one of the main people that helped connect me with other people that said, there's some new stories now. There's some new ways of looking at all of this. And Valerie Andrews is my editor. Valerie, who she is, connected me with a wonderful woman in Milwaukee. You should talk to Peggy Flynn. She's a hospice worker. She really uses her Christian values to to work with people in hospice. So talking to Peggy and talking to a number of other people, I put together a brand new chapter, a brand new draft of the story of heaven. Each chapter opens with a personal story. And I used Peggy's to be the one that I used for the story of heaven, and I want to read it to you. I had been at the hospital with a client for 7 nights straight, a man I had not met before. A friend of his called me because he knew that I did this kind of volunteer vigil keeping. The dying man was terrified, especially of dying alone. He had been too weak to talk. He just wanted to see a face whenever he opened his eyes. About 4 a.m, he was struggling for each breath. I wanted it to be over as much for myself as for him. I wanted a shot of Jameson's, a hot bath, and a bed in that movie. I was standing by his bed, holding his hand. Suddenly, he gripped my hand with amazing strength, his eyes opened, and asked, "Am I all right with God?" My mind started racing with thoughts. I'm not a priest. I don't know this man's religious background. What should I say? He repeated, "Am I all right with God?" There was a moment of absolute silence that seemed to absorb even the machine beeps and the wheezes, the mucus battling in his throat. I felt my body in the hospital room filled with love, palpable, textured, alive. I looked into his eyes and said with a smile, "You are so loved." His face cleared, his eyes gentle. This was part of my re-education. Oh, okay, please. Put it in the pocket. There you go. What came out of this was the notion of beloved community. That for me was the touchstone for the story of heaven. It was quite different than what I had learned earlier on in my Catholic upbringing. The beloved community includes everybody. Everybody is one. Not just Catholics, not just Christians, everybody. And we all know that Martin Luther King used it extensively. He didn't coin the term, but he used it and really popularized it. And for me, that phrase now captures the story of heaven. It is for everyone. Everyone is invited. How many people grew up with the story of hell as part of their background? Yes, a few hands are going up. The story of hell. The story of hell is a place of eternal damnation. Eternal. 18 on Friday, got killed by a car. That's what I believe. But I did feel compelled to include hell in the story of heaven because it has been part of the story. And what I got from reading the more progressive theologians in Christianity and Islam, which also has heaven and hell, and thanks to all the people that I got introduced to, including Father Greg that Judith introduced me to, I got reoriented about hell. Hell is a separation of God. Hell is separation. Hell is on earth if you're separated, and in the afterlife if you're separated. But you're always being called. You're always being called to join the beloved community. There's no such thing as eternal damnation. You're always welcome to join the community when you're ready to do that. That for me is the essential message of the story of heaven. And I got educated as part of doing this book and let go of a lot of old baggage. I'd like to point out, by the way, that my book was published on March 21st, which does contain the notion that hell is a temporary thing and an eternal thing. The book came out on March 28th and said there is no hell. I spooked him by a week. However, it has a much bigger platform. And so, you read my book. And so I I'm very proud of the fact that I scooped out, and again, platform is everything that I learned in this business of books. Mine is very small, his is very large, but we're on the same track. And I also featured him in the story of heaven because I think he's doing a marvelous job of extending the notion of the beloved community beyond, certainly beyond the Catholic world. Another story from The Wave and the Drop is the story of reincarnation. That we have not one, but many lifetimes on Earth. So we can hone our consciousness and experience the one that we all are from different vantage points in different lifetimes. I chose as the opening story for that chapter the death of Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley is one of my big heroes. A brilliant mind of the 20th century, wrote many, many books, For Brave New World, probably. Perennial philosophy, where he gathers all of the spiritual tracks and ideas from the whole world, East and West, and puts them together in one book. And calls it, they all focus on the grounded being. And so when he was dying, he asked his wife Laura to read him out of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So the opening of the story on reincarnation has to do with Laura Huxley taking Aldous through the bardos, and then saying, go to the light, you're doing beautifully, go to the light. And Charlie and I both felt like that was a really powerful message and a way to go through the dying time. So he included it in his book as well. It's in both of our books. By the way, Aldous Huxley died on November 22nd, 1963. Anybody know somebody else that died on that day? Kennedy died. So Aldous Huxley's obituaries were blotted out. And maybe he wanted it that way, who knows. But he died the same day as Kennedy died. There's also in the book of the story of reincarnation, there's a story about Jim Tucker. Jim Tucker's a professor at the University of Virginia who has collected stories of children who remember past lifetimes and put it in a wonderful book called Return to Life, Extraordinary Cases of Children Who Remember Past Lives. And he tracks on whether or not there's any way to validate who, whether this kid who could not possibly know some of the details that they're talking about, and has documented hundreds of them. It's really a fascinating story, and that's in that chapter as well. One of the hardest stories to tell was the story of transformation, and I saved that for the last chapter because it doesn't fall into one particular wisdom tradition. Most of the traditions talk about some kind of transformation, but they all have different views on what that means. And so I chose this story as the opening story for that chapter. I've seen a 7-foot all-white angel standing in the hallway a couple of times this week. I think the angel is here to take me home. This was my story of my friend, Bud Spangler. I was in conversation with my friend of 40 years the week before he died of lung disease. He told me that the angel had been as present as I was that day. We were sitting in his office, and I could see the computer screen over his shoulder. Emails were pouring in from his friends, sending him love and healing energy. I asked him if he wanted to talk about dying, and he shook his head no. A few days later, his wife called me after he died and invited me to spend some time with Bobby. It had only been a couple of hours. Maybe his spirit was still present in the room. I asked him if he had anything to tell me. He'd been a jazz musician all of his life. I suddenly looked up at the ceiling, and from a corner, I distinctly heard When the Saints Go Marching In. It sounded like it was coming across on an old-time radio. Several months later, that was the theme song at his memorial service at Yoshi's, attended by hundreds of people. So I'd like to close this little presentation with this thought. If reading The Wave and the Drop brings you closer to considering your own mortality, and if it opens up your belief system and possibly considering an afterlife, what that might be like, then it's fulfilled its purpose. Just to open up those doors, open up each tone of water There's no answers, absolute answers in that book. It's just a way to hold the discussion with yourself. I believe that death is a transition and there is an afterlife, but and many more dimensions than we know. But there's a very important reason to stay alive in this dimension. And one is to learn love more deeply. That's one of the reasons I believe we're here. Another is to be of service in as many ways as we can. Everybody in this room I know you most personally, is of service in myriad ways, in a number of different ways. One of my purposes in being alive, especially toward the end of my life now, is to I just think a way, it's a way to celebrate achievements, milestones, and come together in ways that, celebrate each other. So, again, that's why we're here today, and thank you again to Starr King for making this all possible.